All right, let's just jump straight into this explainer and completely dismantle a 150-year-old supernatural maritime myth using modern forensic science. I mean, we've all heard the legend of the Mary Celeste, right? It's basically the quintessential ghost ship. For over a century, it's been the subject of some truly wild speculation. We're talking sea monsters, murderous pirates, even alien abductions. But today, we're going to push all of that aside and look strictly at the grounded, verified facts. We're going to use historical logs, structural analysis, chemistry, and modern oceanography to finally solve this mystery once and for all.
So, picture this. It's December 1872, and you're stepping onto the deck of an eerie, totally abandoned vessel, plunging straight into the ultimate nautical cold case. The ship is fully provisioned, highly seaworthy, just bobbing along in the open ocean, and yet every single man, woman, and child on board has simply vanished without a trace. It's incredibly spooky. But to understand how things got to that point, we actually need to rewind and look at the dark history of the ship itself.
Way before it became a famous legend, this ship built up a pretty dark, almost cursed pedigree. It was originally built in 1860 up in Nova Scotia, and back then it was called the Amazon. Well, disaster struck right out of the gate. On its 1861 maiden voyage, the very first captain contracted pneumonia and died within 9 days. Over the next few years, the ship collided with fishing equipment, actually sank another brig in the English Channel, and then in 1867, it was driven ashore and totally wrecked in a massive storm. A year later, an American mariner salvaged it, repaired it, and re-registered it under a brand new name, the Mary Celeste.
Fast forward to late 1872. Command of the vessel was handed over to Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs. And you know, we really have to remember here that these were real human beings facing a terrifying situation, not just fictional characters in a ghost story. Captain Briggs was an incredibly experienced navigator, a deeply religious teetotaler, and a highly respected guy. And he wasn't alone. He brought along his wife Sarah and their 2-year-old baby daughter Sophia. To sail the ship, Briggs handpicked a crew of 7 highly competent, totally reliable mariners. There was zero history of friction or insubordination among them. They were a solid team.
In late October of 1872, the Mary Celeste docked in New York to load up its cargo for a long voyage to Genoa, Italy. And that cargo consisted of exactly 1,701 wooden barrels of highly toxic, denatured industrial alcohol. It was valued at around $35,000 at the time. Now, I really want to stress this point. This was absolutely not drinking alcohol. It was methylated spirit. It's entirely unpalatable and highly poisonous.
But here's the absolutely critical detail hidden in that massive cargo: the number 9. Specifically, 9 porous red oak barrels that got mixed into the bunch. See, out of those 1,701 barrels, the vast majority were made of watertight white oak, which has closed pores. But 9 of them were constructed from red oak, and red oak has open pores that literally allow liquids to seep right through the wood. Keep this detail in your back pocket, because it's going to be central to the disaster that's about to unfold.
Okay, so the ship leaves New York on November 7th. They battle some pretty severe winter weather for over 2 weeks, and the last log entry is made on the morning of November 25th, placing them right near the Azores. After that, the ship goes completely dark. 10 days of total silence pass, until December 4th, when the crew of a Canadian vessel named the Die Gratia spots the Mary Celeste drifting aimlessly. They send over a boarding party, and they arrive at a scene that would instantly spark a million wild theories. What they found proved this definitely wasn't a sudden sinking. The ship's only lifeboat, a small yawl, was completely missing. Crucial navigation tools, like the captain's chronometer, his sextant, and his navigation book were also gone. But incredibly, all of their personal valuables, dry clothing, and even the main logbook were left totally undisturbed. The ship was perfectly seaworthy. Sure, it was taking on about 3.5 feet of water, but honestly, that's hardly enough to threaten a ship of this size. Adding to the weirdness, the main hatch was sealed tight, but the forward hatches were left wide open, and one of the vital bilge pumps had been completely taken apart and left in pieces on the deck. The galley was flooded, and the stove was literally knocked off its mountings. So the Dei Gratia crew actually managed to sail the empty vessel to Gibraltar to claim a salvage reward. And man, that is where the hysteria truly kicked into overdrive. An overzealous prosecutor in Gibraltar named Frederick Sully Flood became dogmatically convinced this was either a violent mutiny or a massive insurance scam. And to make matters worse, guess who got involved in 1884?
Arthur Conan Doyle. Yeah, the creator of Sherlock Holmes. He published a sensational, totally fabricated short story about the vessel, and that piece of fiction single-handedly birthed the ghost ship myth we all know today.
Just look at how crazy the contrast is between the popular myth and the verified facts from the Gibraltar court records. The sensationalist newspapers and Conan Doyle painted this spooky picture of warm, half-eaten meals, steaming mugs of tea, and even a cozy ship's cat found sleeping in the cabin. But the cold, hard reality? No food was prepared at all. The dishes were clean, the stove was completely cold and thrown from its mountings in a flooded galley, and there was absolutely no cat. Literally none of the spooky campfire details were actually real.
But wait, what about the prosecutor's mutiny theory? Well, Solly Flood pointed to what he dramatically claimed was a blood-stained sword and blood splatters on the deck as definitive proof of a murderous rampage. But forensic chemical analysis completely shut that down. There was no mutiny, no drunken rampage, and absolutely no blood on the captain's ornamental sword. Those dark stains were rigorously tested and identified as a simple mixture of common rust and iron citrate. And a remarkably mundane twist, it turns out the stains were just from the captain using lemon juice to clean the blade.
Even with the mutiny debunked, the unsolved nature of the abandonment gave the ship this toxic reputation in the shipping industry. It passed through 17 different owners. Ultimately, the ship fell victim to something called beratry, which is a legal term for when a captain willfully sabotages their own vessel for the insurance money. In 1885, a totally corrupt captain purposely ran the Mary Celeste onto a reef in Haiti and tried to burn it down. He got arrested, and the charred hulk of the most famous ghost ship in history was just left there in the Caribbean to rot.
Years later, in 2001, an expedition confidently claimed they had finally found those wrecked remains in Haiti. But modern science stepped in again, and the results were pretty embarrassing for the expedition. The Geological Survey of Canada analyzed wood core samples from the wreck and found it was longleaf pine, a species not even native to where the Mary Celeste was built. And incredibly, modern tree ring analysis proved the outermost rings of that wood were harvested after 1894, which is almost a full decade after the Mary Celeste was supposedly wrecked there. So definitely a false positive.
So, with the physical ship long gone, we have to treat the surviving 1872 salvage inquiry like a modern CSI investigation. We need to pivot away from the campfire stories and look at the actual chemistry of the cargo and the mechanics of the ship. Only then can we piece together what really happened in those final, terrifying hours on board.
To truly understand why a seasoned captain would panic, we have to talk about a very specific chemical reaction called deflagration. This is the absolute key to the whole mystery because it perfectly explains why there was a total lack of soot or fire damage on the ship. Recent lab experiments prove that when ethanol vapor ignites in a confined wooden space, it creates a deflagration. It's a loud, violent pressure wave, a sudden muffled explosion, but it burns at such a low temperature and it happens so incredibly fast that it literally won't set dry wood or clothing on fire.
All right, let's connect the dots here. Remember those 9 porous red oak barrels we talked about earlier? During the rough Atlantic crossing, they leaked approximately 300 gallons of industrial alcohol straight into the unventilated hold. As the ship reached the warmer temperatures of the Azores, that liquid vaporized into a highly volatile gas. All it took was the steel hoops of the shifting barrels rubbing together to create a spark, triggering a massive deflagration. Think about it. A terrifying pressure wave from 300 vaporized gallons of alcohol goes off below deck. That would absolutely make a captain order his wife and baby off the ship immediately. Fearing a massive secondary explosion, the crew ripped off the forward hatches to let the toxic fumes vent out.
But the thing is, they were dealing with way more than just a chemical scare. This was a compounding disaster. On its previous voyage, the ship had carried coal, and it had also recently undergone structural repairs. So, in the rough seas, a messy slurry of coal dust and wood shavings got sucked right into the bilges, completely clogging the ship's vital water pumps. The crew frantically took one of the pumps apart to try and clean it, and because the cargo hold was packed to the brim, Captain Briggs couldn't even see the bottom of the hull. He was entirely blind to the ship's actual water levels, and with all the sloshing water, his measuring rod gave a falsely high reading. He thought they were sinking.
So here it is, the perfect storm. Let's look at this fatal chain of events. First, an inaccurate chronometer puts the ship 120 miles off course. Next, vital bilge pumps completely clog with coal dust and sawdust, blinding the captain to his flooding status. Finally, those 9 red oak barrels leak, causing a terrifying vapor deflagration. Disoriented, unable to pump out what he thinks is a sinking ship, and terrified of a massive secondary explosion, Captain Briggs makes a totally rational command decision. With land in sight, he orders a precautionary temporary evacuation into the yawl just while the ship airs out.
And here is the truly heartbreaking part. They never intended to leave forever. They only took the navigational instruments they'd need for the lifeboat, leaving their heavy winter coats and valuables behind. They used a heavy rigging line to tether their small boat to the Mary Celeste, just sitting there waiting for the explosive fumes to clear. But the tragic reality is that the sturdy tow line hitched to the ship simply snapped in the gale-force winter winds. Without sails, without oars, tossing in freezing winter waves, the 10 occupants of the yawl were left hopelessly adrift to perish, while their perfectly seaworthy ship was blown away over the horizon.
It wasn't a sea monster, you guys. It wasn't a pirate raid or a homicidal mutiny. It was just a compounding series of mundane, tragic, mechanical, and chemical failures that forced a really good captain into an impossible choice. So, the next time you hear a sensationalized myth, ask yourself, what simple, logical breadcrumbs might be hiding just beneath the surface, waiting for science to explain them? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the impossible.